This is the Metal Gateway Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Metal Gateway Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sibley, and this is Season 2, Episode 2, my conversation with Enrique Sagarnaga. I met with Enrique and recorded this interview back in late 2024. I was on a trip there to Philadelphia and was able to sit down with him and have this conversation. And we did this interview in a coffee shop, so you might hear some coffee shop sounds in the background, but I tried to reduce that as much as I possibly could. Anyway, Enrique is perhaps best known as the drummer of Crypt Sermon, but he also anchors the rhythm section for the black thrash quartet Daeva and a third band, the Silver. He and I talked about his formative years growing up in Bolivia, and in Bolivia at that time there wasn't much of a metal scene the way we might recognize it here in the United States, and how we talked about then how he ended up here in the U.S. working for Relapse Records, which is kind of what he does as a day job today. Anyway, Crypt Sermon, of course, had a huge couple of years. Back in 2024, their latest full-length record, The Stygian Rose, was one of my favorite albums of that year, was also on a ton of year-end best lists, including Decibel Magazine's Album of the Year that year. And the Silver released an album earlier this year called Looking Glass Hymnal Blue on Gilead Media. Definitely check that out. I will include links to that album in the show notes, also for the Stygian Rose if you haven't checked it out. And I also am kind of hoping to see new material from Daeva soon, but Enrique and I did not talk about that, but that's just me putting that out into the world. Their last album, which was called Through Sheer Will and Black Magic, came out in 2022 and is absolutely furious, and I love it. And yeah, so I know Enrique has had a lot on his plate recently, so I guess we'll see if all of these bands are able to turn out new material, because, you know, he can only be at one place at one time. I'll include links to those albums, like I said, in the show notes, and you can check them out. I loved this conversation with Enrique, especially the part where we talked about some of the challenges facing Latin American metal bands. That stuff gave me lots of interesting food for thought. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed as much as I did.
Okay, so let's see. I think what's interesting about this is, just to touch on your question for a second,
Sure.
if I could.
Please.
In addition to playing in bands and all that, I also have a background as a publicist and like marketing agent for Relapse. And before that, I worked at Season of Mist, and I also did indie publicity for a couple of clients. Mm-hmm. And that ranged from everything from synthwave to some of the more aggressive black metal stuff you've ever heard, or prog metal bands and rock and all that stuff. So that's just to say, like, in terms of my background with it on the career side, I'd like to think that I've cast almost as wide a net as possible.
Sure.
And one thing I like to do when I speak to people, whether it's me talking to a friend or someone I'm just meeting like yourself, or even when I'm like in an Uber, right?
Right.
I like asking people how they find new music.
Yeah.
Not genre specific or anything like that. Just like, if you are listening to something in your car or you're walking down the street with your headphones on, how did you come across the thing that you are listening to, and how did you hone in on it? And what I find interesting is it also speaks to exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
I could ask that same question to 500 people. No one will have the same answer whatsoever.
That's right.
Some people will tell you radio. Some people will tell you a Spotify playlist kicked on. Someone will tell you they heard something at the gym, and I find this equally fascinating that you're experiencing the same kind of narrative here. So when it comes to, I guess, my story, I grew up in La Paz, Bolivia.
Oh, okay.
I didn't move to the USA until I was accepted to go to a university here in Pennsylvania. So, I was there till I was about 18.
Uh-huh.
And, it wasn't until almost my latter years of high school where I was acutely aware of the fact that there was anything resembling like a scene. I had a close, tight-knit group of friends from school, and we all grew up kind of appreciating different forms of alternative rock and heavy music. And, we kind of realized what we were in due time.
Right.
And we all started growing our hair out and stuff. But it wasn't until probably like the latter end of sophomore year of high school or junior year of high school where I started meeting people from outside my school, started playing in actual bands and kind of getting involved in that way. In terms of the music that really set me off on a certain path, I just remember like, middle school Enrique and early high school Enrique being kind of keen on things that led themselves to promoting alt rock to me. Whether I've been pretty explicit about my fandom for pro wrestling, which I think is really funny. But at the time, I remember pro wrestling, the soundtrack of it was like pretty shitty, like, new metal and rock. So to hear distorted guitars wasn't strange to me at the time.
Sure.
Then we also had MTV Latinoamerica, which also had a Headbangers Ball, and also had
And around what time is this?
it was probably like anywhere between 2001 and 2007.
Okay.
This being in middle school and
Okay.
high school. And, and for them to show music videos from all these like heavy bands and stuff, that also wasn't strange. And that was from everything like, Judas Priest's Angel of Retribution record to at some point Slayer put something out there. And then, you had your friends in school who also like things like Slipknot or whatever. I remember it went. I had friends who liked Cradle of Filth, who liked Slipknot, who liked Opeth. Like it kind of
was MTV Latin America. Were they playing mostly like North American and European bands, or were they playing some of the South American stuff too? Like,
no, it was mostly North American bands.
Okay.
I remember seeing a Headbangers Ball in high school that had a Black Dahlia Murder music video. I even remember like that Mudvayne song, the Berber Gang song that everyone memes about.
I don't know them at all.
Whatever their
that
most
was a band that
whatever
totally
their most
passed me
like
by.
popular music video was, where they're all wearing the clown makeup.
Yeah, right.
That was like that would be on at like 2 p.m. on a Saturday.
Okay.
It was that popular.
Yeah.
So there was always this. I think when you combine that with this culture that always remained back home, which was a culture of like resist, fight the government,
Yep.
Don't be afraid of cops, don't be happy with your surroundings. I mean, if you think about it, I came from I think at the time, and it still might be true, the poorest country in Latin America. This 70% of the population back home is indigenous. And at the time when I was a kid, it was a staggering number of what percentage of those people were like below the poverty line. And I mean well below the poverty line. Like,
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? That means that you have to, from a very young age, understand things like institutionalized racism, economic inequality,
Yep.
The fight for rights. And because I came from a country that was pretty tumultuous, seeing things like, national strikes, people, throwing stuff at police cars, people getting into fights. I lived through a coup in the early 2000s. That kind of struggle, it made me feel a certain way.
Sure.
And when I started listening to like aggressive music and even stuff that was more on the nose with it, like let's say, I've joked about how if you grew up Latin American and you like this kind of scene at all, you had your mom and your grandma's Catholic Bibles inside your nightstand, but then right below that was a copy of Sepultura's Roots.
Right.
Or just some sort of Sepultura CD. So when you discover a band like that and you pair it with like Slayer or Metallica or something, you're getting something that helps you, have this cathartic experience that gets your energy for how you feel about this stuff out. And then when you hone in on bands like Sepultura that are more like, socially conscious and their lyrics are more relevant than ever about these exact topics.
Yes.
You start finding ways, aside from attending a sociology class in school, you start finding ways to articulate your anger and your sense of desperation or I don't know. It's almost like a manifestation of how you feel and how you're reacting to what you see in front of you. I know that's a lot.
Yeah. No, it's a lot, and I get it. It's as you were talking, I was remembering an interview I did last season with Joseph Schaefer, who I don't know if you've met. Joseph.
Yeah, and he's a great guy.
Yeah, and I don't know if you knew this or not, but his mother is from Brazil, so he's half second generation Brazilian American, and he told a really great story in his episode about how the Roots album really taught him what it meant to have Brazilian heritage, because he didn't really fully understand it until he really got into that album.
Yeah.
So I I think it's just interesting that you bring that up from actually coming from that, you know, from that milieu. So it's a super important album for a lot of South Americans, metalheads.
I would certainly say so. And what's funny about it is because, you know, it's widely regarded as their new metal record or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like the second people get turned on to what we would call like the real shit or the underground stuff, you start not feeling embarrassed, but you start like being like, oh, well, there's better Sepultura records, right? Like,
Yeah.
And there are, but I think that one in terms of an impact, right?
Yeah.
That was one of them. And then, you know, so
Maybe it's their new metal record, but it also maybe is their most quintessentially South American record.
could be, and it's also obviously their furthest reaching, right?
Sure.
So if that one's going to be the one that appeals to the most people because of the fact that it's easier to follow, maybe it's a little bit less abrasive, that helped it. And so with my journey, it's like, you know, I'm already getting used to how this music sounds. I'm starting to find things that help me articulate how I feel, and then there's another component to it, which to me has kind of spoken to the nerdier side of my personality,
Right.
which is, you know, I have this affinity towards things that are like magical. I like narratives. You know, maybe it's because of, I don't know if it's because of my Latino background or whatever, but there's a degree to which I'm still very much a fatalist. So when I started discovering this corner of this kind of music that had a touch of magic to it, that was either fantastical or just incredibly atmospheric or something like that, I was like instantly drawn to it. So, you know, I was already in tune with things like death metal, let's say, because of bands like Slayer and Sepultura. So I start, you know, kind of going down this wormhole of finding like, you know, Morbid Angel and Hate Eternal at the time. That record blew my mind in terms of I Monarch, for example, and King of All Kings. Those records blew my mind in terms of what you could do on drums. Derek Roddy's still one of my favorite drummers of all time. But then kind of more importantly, I've told this story before, but I have this vivid memory of me. I have insomnia, and I had it back as, you know, when I was a kid. And I just remember like, you know, perusing the internet, trying to find new things to listen to. And because at the time we didn't really have a lot of resources to buy music. I'll get into a story about that too, but
Sure.
At the time it's just what I had the internet. So I come across black metal for the first time ever. Cut to a very young Enrique. It's like 4 a.m. and I find Emperor in the Nightside Eclipse, and I'm talking to you about this wearing that shirt right now. Actually,
Oh, yeah,
I realize
right.
that. And I just remember listening to the beginning of Into the Infinity of Thoughts, and like, you know, when you combine how that record sounds with the fact that you're up at 4 a.m. in this kind of days, and you already have this teen angst and stuff, like it just made for this perfect like concoction of magic that just knocked me on my ass. Like that record felt absolutely devastating in a way that I hadn't really experienced before, because so much of that music is like, you know, death metal stuff. It's angry, it's, you know, but there's something about like the atmosphere with black metal that's almost vulnerable, and you have to kind of surrender to this. I don't know if it's like a suspension of belief or whatever you want to call it. It's almost like the pro wrestling effect, where you're quite honestly taking a bunch of grown men in makeup like very seriously, and
Right.
and I mean that more in the carnival way than anything else. And I think that's interesting, you know, when you could normalize people having these wild looks to them through the scope of understanding bands like Kiss, for example, right? But when it comes to a bunch of dudes wearing this crazy makeup and running around in the woods with witch hats on and capes and stuff, you know, if you really want to take that seriously at a face value, which is what I like to do, you have to surrender yourself to this sense of magic to it.
Oh yeah, it is magical. It's highly theatrical.
Yeah.
And okay, yeah, I'm with you. I'm following you. So,
It's interesting. And now
sure.
as an adult, I think about this all the time. Like, can I still take it seriously? And I still absolutely do. In fact, I think very fondly of it.
Yeah,
you
me
know,
too.
for as much tragedy and violence as that scene in Norway had, right? Back then in the 90s, I try to firmly plant myself in their shoes at the time. And, you know, it's not like I'll agree with everything they think about, maybe even politically or whatever.
Right.
But at the same time, I can appreciate the fact that these were like 16, 17, 18-year-olds. And this was their world. And, and it was real. You know, it was as real as it gets. And you're committing arson, you're killing one another, you're trying to outdo each other in these completely absurd ways by most reasonable standards.
Right.
But for them, that was daily life. And there's there's like a magic to that for me. It's crazy, you know. And I don't know. That's always like, that feeling has always remained with me. And then as soon as I figured out, you know, how to appreciate that kind of music, from there on out, it was just like full force metal, heavy metal, death metal, black metal, prog metal. And, you know, that's also kind of in line with the time I was starting to play drums.
Yeah,
Like, I was really getting into playing drums in my teenage years. So obviously,
you just anticipated my next question. At what point did you start like discovering that being a musician was going to be part of your?
Oh,
your
I can
journey?
actually pinpoint this. So it was, let's see, probably, forget if it was like 7th or 8th grade in school. We had to do these like different kinds of classes. Like depending on what rotation you were on, you either had phys ed or you had music or you had something else. And, you know, finally the time to take up music came up. And I was so scared because I had never touched an instrument before. And I was really, really hesitant because I was afraid I wasn't going to know how to read sheet music. And it was that kind of class. I had to learn how to read sheet music and all this stuff. I had this teacher who hated me. She just did not like me. I don't know why. Shout out to Carol Bradner, who made me learn drums out of spite to her, honestly. Because I sat down behind a kit and I started to kind of pick it up right away. And I loved it. I really loved it.
Yeah.
She never wanted to give me like a featured spot in a band. Like even if a school band, you know. So I ended up telling my parents, and you know, that they helped me out. They got me a drum kit at home. I started taking private lessons. I ended up working with a gentleman who worked for the National Conservatory of Bolivian Music back home, and you know, he was a great teacher. I got to basically do one-on-one mentoring with him, and it was through the conservatory, so that was fantastic.
Wow.
And that was concurrent with school.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I was like, all right, like maybe I didn't take up music in my school or my high school, but I got this way better musical education coming out of it, you know? And that just kind of furthered my interest in all of this stuff.
So at that time when you were studying music, were you able to, as part of your study, incorporate metal into that, or was it more classical conservatory type?
It was a lot of like foundational drum stuff at first. Then it was like, you know, how to play drum solos, how to play a little bit of like Latin percussion and jazz music. But then because it was also kind of a mentorship, I just kind of got to tailor my classes to what I was interested in.
Yeah.
So he helped me. His name was Victor Guzman. He helped me how to learn how to play double bass, how to transfer like rudiments from my hands to my feet, things like that. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. So at this point, you're still a teenager,
Yeah.
and you're still in Bolivia,
Yeah.
and you're not. Are you playing in a band at this point?
Yeah, we had a couple of things. I had a band with my friends back home, like in my high school. But then I also had like friendships outside of that school that were more kind of tightly knit with the actual scene back home.
Right.
And then this is the next part of my journey here. So before I tell you what this is, I'll give you some backstory. So
Okay.
in my formative time, when I was like finally trying to buy CDs and collecting this kind of stuff, back home, pirating is crazy. It's like the #1 export for media and entertainment in Bolivia. Like,
Yeah, because this is the early 2000s, right? This is the prime era of like Kazaa and LimeWire and Napster and Morpheus and all of that stuff. File sharing is happening.
Imagine we'd have like like an equivalent of a Blockbuster where you rent movies, but they're all pirated.
Yeah,
they're not
right.
even official copies.
That's right.
And when that died down, what people would end up doing is buying DVDs and CDs and all this stuff from kiosks, much like how you do here with like magazines and newspapers. Be pirated DVDs and Blu-rays later on and all that stuff. Eventually, we had a store called Rockmania that imported a bunch of T-shirts. Even those were bootleg. And then actual official releases, but they were very expensive. And if you wanted to pre-order something, it would take months.
Yeah.
So, you know, at the time I would be buying music from kiosks, and this kind of added to the whole magic of it. It's kind of relevant right now because at the time that we're recording this, you know, Juan Brujo from Brujeria just died.
Yeah, it's just a couple days ago.
And that was another oddly formative band for people in Latin America because they spoke about all the crazy Satan stuff, but then also like anti-government, pro, you know, guerrilla movements, all this kind of stuff. So obviously we were very interested in that. So one of my missions as a kid was to buy their CD Matando Güeros, right? And I remember going to a kiosk and being like, hey, do you have the Brujeria CD? And the guy looks at me and he goes, oh, shh, I'll go to the back and get it, but like, don't tell anyone. And like,
That's awesome.
That's coming from someone who probably thought the cover was real, with the beheaded figure and all that stuff. So when you're a kid and you see a guy reacting to your request like that, you're like, oh, this is the coolest shit I've ever done.
I'm in.
I'm the fucking man right now.
I am such a badass.
So anyway, Brujeria and Sepultura meant a lot, and therefore a big part of my upbringing back home, especially towards the end of my time there, I was in a couple of tribute bands. Like I was in a tribute band to Brujeria very briefly with some friends of mine, and we also did a couple of Sepultura and Carcass covers and things like that.
Nice.
And I was playing bars before I would be legally allowed to be in one, but I was in the band, so it didn't matter. Yeah.
That's awesome. When you said you moved to the U.S. to go to college. I mean, at what point did you sort of get involved in? Did you move here to Philly?
Yeah, I moved to Philly to attend Drexel University when I was 18. I remember this story. I was wearing a King Diamond shirt, and
as one does,
and I was just walking around campus, and this guy walks by me. He just looks like what you would imagine a Hesher kid to be at the height of that revival, like in 2007, right? Mm-hmm. And he goes, "Cool shirt," and that was it. That was it. He walked past me. That was it. Fast forward almost about a year later, I'm, my freshman year at college is finishing, which means that I now need to find housing because I'm not going to live in the dorms anymore. Mm-hmm. So, you start making some friendships in school, and eventually someone directed me to a group of people who were looking to move into a house in West Philadelphia. And lo and behold, this guy who said nice shirt
was one of those guys.
Was one of those guys. And that's when I straight up just fell into this world of West Philadelphia, like punk and metal, like this scene. And like, a lot of those people were either slightly older than me or my contemporaries. So that also meant that, like, in addition to having all these shared interests in music and stuff, there was still a big portion of us that couldn't go to shows because we weren't old enough.
Right.
So what do you do then? Well, the DIY scene then starts throwing shows in basements and
house shows
and all this stuff.
Yeah,
and,
right.
And that's how it started for me. That's how I kind of just got ingrained in it.
Yeah. And so then you start meeting people. Why did you choose Drexel, by the way?
A co-op program.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Drexel sets up its students with a co-op program where they can get, like, in addition to their diploma, they can kind of graduate with a resume that has like actual, relevant work experience.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that was a big plus for me coming here.
That's cool. So did you major in music? What did you study?
No, I did global journalism. I didn't really want to continue like an actual collegiate musical education. It just wasn't for me. I knew I didn't want to like teach music as I got older, and for me that towards the end of it I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to play music, I'm going to play metal. That's not really... You're
not going to go to college to learn how to play metal.
Yeah, right. I don't want to do that.
No, so that's right.
I wanted to pursue something else.
That makes sense. So okay, so you're now you're a student at Drexel. You're connected to this DIY scene. Mm-hmm. You're part of the Philly metal community. Like, where's the kind of next big step of evolution where it happened for you? Like, where you got into the places where you are now. You mentioned you were at Season of Mist. You're now at Relapse. Just tell me about that.
Let's see.
That path.
Yeah, I eventually graduated from college, and that was right around a time where a friend of mine who actually worked at Season of Mist at the time needed help. They just needed someone like packing orders and stuff.
Right.
So I ended up, getting a connect there. I ended up doing a bunch of merch ship outs and stuff. At the time, Sean Pelletier was the main head there, and we developed a friendship. I started working there for a little while, and then eventually the staff turned over to a degree to where now I was working under Gordon Conrad, who was formerly from Relapse. Mm-hmm. And then under his tutelage, I became the in-house publicist for Season of Mist. And that went on for almost like 8 years.
Oh, wow.
Maybe even more, maybe like 9 years. So after a while, under, learning from him and working with him and, the myriad of bands over at Season, just felt like it was time for me to go. Mm-hmm. And that kind of lined up with an opening at Relapse. So I figured I would try something different and went there. And, it's a different roster of bands. It's a different company culture.
Totally.
So that was cool. It felt like, it didn't feel like a lateral move. It felt like just a whole new environment for me. And that's where I've been ever since. And in that time too, I got a master's degree and in public communication, which is very relevant to being a publicist, a marketer,
Sure.
some sort of professional communicator. And throughout my journey while I was in Season of Mist, I was playing around in like some local bands and things like that. And then I had a friend of mine, his name is Steve Jansen, and I had met him through some mutual friends in college. We weren't very close at the time. We were just people who messaged each other on Facebook back and forth every once in a while. And
Sure.
maybe we met up a couple times in college just to have a drink or hang out or whatever. But one day, just out of the blue, like we're talking on the internet, and he asks me to come hang out with him while he was dog sitting for a friend of his who was out of town. So I go, him and I catch up. It's been a long time at that point. I was like fresh out of school, and just a nice hangout. And then maybe like a week or so later, he tells me, hey, like I'm working on this band with some friends. It's a doom band. Do you want to come and hang out and maybe play drums? Because he knew I was a drummer. I was in local bands at the time, and I was maybe looking to do something else in addition to it. Because drummers, you can't just be in one band.
Yeah,
it's never the case.
You guys are in like a million bands at once.
Yeah. So I went there, met up with all those guys, and it just kind of clicked right away. Mm-hmm. And that's how eventually like Crypt Sermon formed. And to me, that's the band that kind of catapulted me into any sort of scene, because, or at least on a national level, or if you want to call it that, just because that was really the first band I was involved in that got a different set of offers, more so than it is just to play like a local show or like a local bar. Like that was the first band I got to play Maryland Death Fest with. We got a huge break playing Psycho Las Vegas, things like that. And that was just like off the heels of our very first record that we put out.
Right.
And then from then on, it just kind of kept evolving. Like Steve and I both wanted to try and tackle other kinds of music together. So he went off and did Trench Rot and a couple other things. And then eventually he asked me to play drums on his black thrash band, Daeva. And then throughout all of that, I was meeting all the guys from Horrendous. Philly's very incestuous.
Yeah.
And we started doing our own band together, the Silver. So that's kind of how I ended up in the three bands I'm currently in right now. So it's just been like this very nuclear home base, this like nuclear family of bands where it's just like everything that we're doing is like very explosive and radiating with creativity. It's really interesting. Yeah.
How do you the question I want to ask you is about like how do you, as a drummer in these these three bands that have very different sounds, how do you move between those worlds? What's that like for you? Like, is it, I mean, the whole feel of the music is so different from band to band.
Yeah, I think that speaks to just our different, not only our different backgrounds as people, but even just like our musical backgrounds and what excites us. Like I think, I grew up playing fast music and having an eye towards things like brutal death metal and Hate Eternal and bands like that, right? And I can't put that flavor of drumming into something like Crypt Sermon, right?
Right.
So having that want to do that kind of stuff always remains. I had that itch. So when a band that allowed me to play fast presented itself, of course I'm going to try and do it.
Right.
Then with the Silver, like, it's funny, the way I thought about it for a long time was like, I think about the times when all these Norwegian musicians who came from really abrasive like black metal bands decided to just do a prog project together.
Right.
And of course it's awesome, I think of Arcturus, bands like that. It's just crazy.
Like, look at the journey that the guys from Over have done over the years, like, going from like the most abrasive black metal you can imagine in the early days to, the stuff they're doing now is completely different. It's not just, even metal.
It's insane, but it's also very inspiring. So I said to myself, like, what if I got a group of people together who played this one genre of music very well, and then we all got together and threw ourselves into this other genre of music? Like, how would we fare and how would we understand it?
Right.
And that's how the Silver kind of came together.
So what kind of conversations have you guys had over the years about this? Like, about how it works? Do you guys talk about it? Like, do you just sort of go do it?
We just kind of do it. I think like collectively, I can't think of, we'll write stuff on our own and present it to one another and things like that. But I think the way we kind of understand it is just trial by fire, where we just sit down and play something together and just see if it clicks.
Yeah.
And luckily for me too, like thematically, all the bands are very different.
Yeah.
So there's no fear of overlap necessarily, and that's kind of nice because it gives you all these different kinds of outlets, both musically, lyrically, just creatively, even art direction wise. It's all very different. And it allows us to explore these different sides of our personalities,
Yeah, you come up with an idea and be like, oh, this is a Crypt Sermon idea, or this is a Daeva. idea. Yeah.
And I've always thought that you can't be to everything. You can't be everything to everyone all the time, right?
That's
so,
right.
So if you can allow yourself to have these different moments where you kind of can at least be this one thing to like such an extreme degree, it's almost more fun and maybe impressive in that way. You know? Yeah.
That's cool. You know, where do you feel like this goes from here for you? I mean, where are you at now, you know, with all this stuff and I mean, you've told me where you're at, but where do you feel like it goes from here?
It's interesting. Like, I think there's the one side is like my career, right? Like part of my job is to market bands to people and get people excited about new releases and shape the soundtrack of people's lives.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think it's a noble profession. I don't know. But at the end of the day, there is also commerce.
I think it is.
There's also commerce, right? Like, for as excited as you can get someone to write about X band, you also want there to be sales. And I think the way people think about music promotion, it's forever changing.
Sure.
You know, the social media has opened the floodgates to all these different ways to present a band, a product, an idea, a narrative. And we see it change it month to month. Like, there's no set algorithm for how to game Instagram or X or Facebook or whatever. It changes quite often. And if there's anyone out there who tries to sell you the secret sauce to it, there's snake oil salesmen, because it just changes so rapidly. Even best practices, best days and times to post something, it's not the same from platform to platform, let alone what kind of content are we talking about and what gets people excited. So for me, that I kind of, it's challenging, but I do love it. And it keeps me aware that it'll forever be changing, right? So every day is new. If something I tried the week prior didn't work, I can do something else the next week and try to present a band in a different light. So that's cool. I also think I'm in an environment now where I get to promote and work with bands from different corners of the world, different sounds, different approaches. You might have 3 or 4 death metal bands on Relapse at any given time, but none of them sound alike.
Right.
You know, and none of them have the same story to tell, which is interesting. So for me, that's the future with my career. In terms of my music, I think it's always this constant, you know, want to outdo yourself from one record to another. And that could be in terms of anything. Musicianship, I'm always striving to be the best drummer I can be. You know, the weight you give a record, is it a concept? Is it just a cool idea you want to put out there? Am I using this record to vent about something?
Right.
And just having it speak to where I'm at in life at that moment. I think that's what's important. I want it to speak to who I am in this like very specific moment in time, because I think that's where the honesty comes from with it, you know?
Sure.
And I think people can relate to that. And even if they don't like what I'm doing, like, they can at least hopefully appreciate the fact that it came from an earnest place.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. How in touch with the like Latin American scene are you? Like, because I know my understanding is I'm not as up on it as I feel like I should be, but my understanding is there's a whole lot of really cool shit happening in metal in like South America, and I'm just sort of curious, as you're, you know, being a South American, what are your thoughts on where the state of South American metal today?
I think it's cool. It's forever growing, you know, and I pay attention to a lot of like really cool underground bands. Like, one of my favorite Bolivian bands is Kulto, Maldito, who I think have some releases on Hell's Headbangers, or is it, maybe not, maybe it's Nuclear War Now. But anyway, you know, I think any scene strives
I'll try to dig something up and put a link in the
the
show notes we'll give them a shout out.
Yeah. And you know, I think there's another band called Black Candles. I still have friends back home who are still going at it with their punk bands, with their death metal bands. There's one called Anarcotizados, which is like a kind of more of like a punk band.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, if I ever keep in touch with people back home, I find that corner of the world, at least the corner I grew up in, to be moving a little bit slower than some of the scenes around it. But you know, you always want to keep in touch with where you came from and what people are doing. I think there's a lot to be discovered there still. I think that it's hard for me to pinpoint like successful South American bands that really broke through in recent years. It's tough. Like,
yeah, that's, I guess, where I was going with that was, you know, whenever you mention South American metal to North American metalheads, people talk about Sepultura. That's for a lot of people, that's about as far as it goes.
Yeah.
But I know that there's so much more happening there. And I guess my question for you, and this is partly a question for you as a musician, but also as a promoter, what do you think needs to happen in order to promote those bands and get them, to a wider audience that can, really embrace what they're doing, outside of their own local scenes, to get them sort of into the cycle of the global metal community.
Yeah,
because I feel like they've really been excluded. A lot of them have really been excluded, maybe not intentionally, but I feel like a lot of South American music has been excluded from the global metal community.
I think there's two issues with it that might be specific to Latin America versus when I think about bands that come from a different, like, far away kind of culture. So if you compare it to Japan, right?
Right.
So let's talk about like Japanese hardcore bands and metal bands, right?
Sure.
Japan still has their own set of like record labels. They also have, renowned record stores, right?
Right.
And a culture that doesn't push that away. Whereas back home, I think there is a struggle for there to be legitimate businesses that sell music at an actual fair price point,
right,
to distributors and artists alike, because bootlegging is just so rampant.
Right.
And I think it's kind of interesting because by the same token, you have people who just don't make enough money to afford the actual import prices on records. So, a CD back home used to cost me like 20 pesos, which is like $3. But
and this would be for a bootleg CD.
Yeah. So that means that for like $20, you could get nearly an entire discography if you wanted.
Sure.
And that comes with an album cover with everything.
Yeah.
Versus buying an import for like 150 to 200 pesos. That's rough.
It's a big ask.
It's a huge ask, right?
Yeah.
So I think I think those are the two big issues. It's like you don't have these like renowned big labels that are there to support the artists, and you don't have the kind of like import distribution to help artists make a fair amount of money. Because at the end of the day, like, yes, it's cool that there's like a lot of sick bands back home. I just wish they made a fair amount of money so they could actually get out and tour the world.
Yeah, right.
That's hard. Getting out of South America and Bolivia particularly, it's expensive. Like, you have to get visas to come here.
Right.
And someone who's selling their demo for like 20 to 50 pesos isn't going to make the money they need to get out.
Right,
that's tough.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know if there's any answers, if we can come up with any answers for that, but
that's as most of an educated guess as I can give it, and
I think it's probably true. And it points back to a comment you made earlier where you talked about one of the things you learned about was, you learned about things like economic inequality, right?
Yeah.
And that's points directly to this same issue.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think like it's interesting too because like Europe, right? So in Europe, for example, if you're a band in Sweden, you can get government funding for your project. You can have government grants that help you pay for your practice space that,
This is incredible.
Yeah, like they celebrate the arts. Back home, they do too. But 200, kroner is not the same as 200 pesos.
That's
right.
right.
So again, that is tough, right? And back home, there are Battle of the Bands concerts. I remember there was we have a famous mountain called Illimani. So we had the Illimani Metal Fest. And it would be a Battle of the Bands type scenario where these bands would play a fest, and then there would be a winner that would get some sort of grant to record a full-length record with a professional studio. And that's cool, and that's needed, and I'm glad there's people who are trying to keep it alive like that. I just think there has to be some sort of lack of music industry infrastructure for bands to kind of get ahead in that way after that,
Yeah, and it sounds like there's also I mean it's not just the lack of recording. It's there's not the retail infrastructure to sell it and distribute it, and so it's very complex. There's a lot of things that are going on, but that makes a lot of sense. I've actually never discussed this with anybody until today, so it's an interesting.
And that's just one side of it.
I get it.
That's how I can look at it.
Yeah. That's why I asked.
And then, you have to ask yourself, is the music relevant? Does it affect, is it relatable? Does the language affect anything? Which I would say no. I mean, how many successful European bands that don't speak English are there? Japanese too, and so on and so forth. So that's probably not something that fits into that equation. But I would think that if anything, it has to be like an industry issue.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right about the language issue. I don't think that's an issue, especially in metal. especially in extreme metal, because for a lot of people,
The words don't even matter.
the words don't even matter.
They should. But a lot of times they don't.
The word, yeah. The vocals become another instrument in the atmosphere, right? And the lyrics become not unimportant, but they become less central to the whole feeling of music, right? So, yeah, that's cool. This is a really interesting conversation. And I know we are probably running short on time, but I wanted to ask, I have one more question that I ask everybody at the end of these interviews, and this maybe will riff on what we just talked about with Latin America, but my question is tell me, give me an album that you've discovered in the last year that you really are into that is not a metal album.
Ooh, that's a great question, actually.
I'm trying to dispel this myth that metalheads only listen to metal. I can't
pronounce. I think it's called, for anyone out there, please forgive me if I'm butchering the name. I think it's called Valkama from a band called Tenhi.
Oh, I saw this.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to it.
It's a tremendous
folk
record. And I've been a Tenhi fan for a few years now. There's such a weight to it. I don't know the gentleman's voice, the singer, but he has such a unique voice. And I guess you're right. It's one of those things where I don't even know what he's saying. I have to look up translations for the lyrics, but it's so, the word isn't somber. There's just such a weight to everything they do, and the whole vibe of that record is very it's somber. It's plotting. I wouldn't call it a doom rock record by any means. It's more of a folk thing. I really love that record. I wish I could pronounce it. There's that. I'm trying to think of what else blew me away lately that isn't metal. Nothing to the degree that did, I gotta say.
Well, that's cool. I mean, sometimes there's just a couple of things, but no, that's good. Thank you.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
I really am glad you were able to make the time for me this afternoon, and it's been really interesting, and it's been great to get to meet you too.
Likewise. Cool. Appreciate it.
So yeah, thanks. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Enrique mentioned a couple of his favorite Bolivian metal bands that he wanted to shout out, Kulto, Maldito, and Black Candles, so I've included links to those in the show notes, so definitely go check them out. Some really interesting stuff there. He didn't mention this band, but I also wanted to shout out my most favorite South American metal band that I've discovered in the past couple of years. Back in summer of 2025, so a little over a year ago, there was a band called Cuatro. They're from Santiago, Chile, and I had the good fortune of catching them at that festival a little over a year ago, and it was just one of the really best doom sludge sets I've seen in the past little while. So they did take a video of that show, and so I will link to that video as well, and you can check that out. But I encourage you to go poke around a little bit in the Latin American metal scene. There's some really interesting things happening across that continent, and if you dig a little bit, you'll find some really cool things. So definitely check it out. This podcast is a production of Studio Portcullis. Our theme music is by Tauntaun. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. If you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. Reviews really help other people to find the show. If you have comments or questions or suggestions for guests you'd like to see on the show, please email them to metalgatewaypodcast@gmail.com, or you can slide into my DMs on Instagram as well, @metalgateway. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll talk to you soon.